anything of those teams jump out to you as an egregious error in judgment by me?
I mean, 5 SEC teams, Colin, is a big, bold statement. Honestly, I was a little surprised to see you have LSU in there. Missouri would be the team that I think is the one to watch. I mean, they finished last year, with a great ending. They got the best of Ohio State, have almost everybody back, great receivers. Brady Cook's a really good quarterback, really good offensive line. The schedules are also really, really favorable. It's hard for me to look at their schedule and know what they have personnel wise and not think at worst they'd be 9-3. I look at LSU, they lost 3 first-round picks. They were terrible on defense last year. I do think Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator, who by the way came from Missouri, is a good addition. But I'm not seeing them as a playoff team. I think if there is a 5th team, and that's a big if, because for one conference to have 5 playoff teams, I think it feels like it's a little bit of a reach at this point.
Is what will be your forecast for the big argument? Who will, like I said, there's a lot of eye candy with Penn State. They got a good quarterback, a very easy late season schedule. So if they stumble against an Ohio State, they could reel off 4 big, pretty wins at the end of the year. So could Iowa. They won't be as pretty, but they could do it. Is there a team you look at and say, man, Tennessee to me, if they lose that late Georgia game, is there a team to you that you think is going to be on the outside looking in and they're really, really talented?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious what happens with Ole Miss, right? They have a talented quarterback. They've upgraded in the trenches through the portal on both sides of the ball. Way better defensive linemen, some really good offensive linemen. They took 2 who were starters on that team that played for the national title at Washington. But the expectations on this team are really building. You look at them and say, okay, this should be the year Lane Kiffin makes a playoff team. I mean, the last time Lane Kiffin had big expectations on him was when he was at USC and they were preseason number 1, and that team didn't even finish in the top 25. Now, I think Lane Kiffin's come a long way from that, but I also think that they're still an SEC team playing a really rough schedule, and to get through it when now all of a sudden, there's all these big expectations on it, that's going to be interesting to see how that program handles it.
So Lincoln Riley yesterday or the day before had a quote, and I'm sure people at USC didn't love it, where he said, listen, we've come a long way, but we got to upgrade facilities and the NIL. Well, I know for fact that USC doesn't have Oregon's NIL, but they're somewhere between 12 and 15 million. They've actually done a really good job rebooting that in the last year. And it did sound a little to me, it landed like, okay, it's a little excuse making. Harbaugh won 10 games overnight at Michigan and there was no NIL. Like, you're a big brand, it's LA. Where are you with Lincoln Riley and this team? Boy, they are young offensively. It's like freshmen and sophomores everywhere as they venture into a much tougher conference. Where are you on Lincoln and the Trojans?
I think it feels like a reset right now. They're 3 years in, and it feels like it's kind of back to square one, perception-wise. And look, Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison and Lincoln covered up a lot of flaws because they were awful before he got there. I mean, Brock Ewart and I were part of the crew that did the last USC-UCLA game, and it was a mess. The culture of that program was toxic. And I think when Lincoln got there, I think there were steps that were taken, but there were still a lot of flaws within it that he inherited that were still there. And I think, again, I think Caleb Williams' greatness, overcame a lot of that. But then last year, the personnel is awful on defense. And I think that was something that they just could not overcome. The offensive line was worse last year and the schedule got harder. So I think that's why we saw them, struggle to be, they were a 7-win team at the end of the regular season. They got beat by UCLA. I like the hires that Lincoln has made on defense. Danton Lynn did a really good job at UCLA. The challenge is I think Danton Lynn had better talent at UCLA than he's going to have this year at USC. And there's no Laiatu Latu on that USC defense. There's nothing close to that in the defensive front. And I think that's going to still be a problem for them. Can they be an 8-win team? Yeah. Can they be a real playoff contender? I doubt it. And They have good young receivers. I think Miller Moss will play well, but the problem I think perception wise, Colin, is it doesn't look like they're recruiting that well, and it doesn't feel like, for all the talk about the NIL part, you know, it was all over the place when Lincoln got there. That is not his fault. I think that was, you had an athletic department that was in disarray. I think it was a great move for them to get Jen Cohen, the AD who came from Washington. Now there's like real people in the athletic department. Before it was kind of like all smoke and mirrors. So I think there's some promising signs, but how are USC fans going to feel if their team goes 7-5 again?
Yeah.
I think that's a tougher sell, but they need to see, and it's a tough sell to recruits also, for especially on the defensive side of the ball. You're not turning down Georgia or some of the SEC schools to go for a place that's defense has been really bad the last few years. So they got to get, I feel like they got to get to good before they can even think about being a playoff contender at this point. And that's why I feel like it's really kind of a reset for Lincoln right now.
Okay, Ryan Day lost his last 3 games to Jim Harbaugh, and in all 3 games, no question, Michigan was the more physical team, took over the games in the second half. Ohio State was pretty and was fun and was talented and has great recruiting. But I didn't know what Ohio State was other than talented. I sometimes feel that with Sark teams. They're talented. That Harbaugh, Saban, Kirby Smart build cultures. Sark and Ryan Day to this point build rosters. And that matters too. But I look at Ryan Day and I'm like, okay, you lose that game in Eugene. Are the Wolves out? I know it sounds ridiculous because he only loses to Michigan and maybe a Georgia, but I do feel like there's some heat. I think people look at this conference and go, 2 teams have way better players and way better NILs. That's what it feels like to me. Like Harbaugh puts almost more weird pressure on him because the best coach is gone. Am I crazy?
Well, you're crazy, but be that as it may, Colin, I think what would you have to, losing to Oregon at Oregon, it's not like all of a sudden he's going to get fired or his seat's going to get that much hotter. It'd be losing to Michigan, especially they lost the entire offensive line, no JJ McCarthy. A lot of the leaders are gone. And obviously Jim Harbaugh now lives by us on the West Coast and is coaching the Chargers. I think they'll still be a good team. I don't think they're a top 5, top 10 team at Michigan. So if they were to lose that game, and that game's in Columbus this year, then that would be a brutal one for him. But I still think, you look at the success he's had. I also like some of the moves he's made. He made some tough decisions. He gave up play calling. And I think to bring in Chip Kelly, who, by the way, is as good in the run game as anybody in college football. I think that piece will be critical to them because if you're going to be good in the run game, you're going to be physical. I think that kind of sends a tone. I'm not saying that Ryan Day, when he had CJ Stroud and some of the other great receivers that also they have there, it was like they were playing 7-7. I don't think that's fair. I don't think their problems to me are not what like USC and Lincoln's problems are in terms of like that perception. They still have really talented receivers. Everybody's raving about Jeremiah Smith. He'll be the next great star there as a freshman receiver, but they have a lot of really good defensive players who decided I'm going to hold off on the NFL and I'm going to come back for one more year. To me, I know who you have as your preseason number 1. This would be my preseason number 1. I think this is the year. I don't want to say it's national championship or bust, because I think if they lose, in the playoff, deep in the playoff after beating Michigan, I don't think you can turn the page on a guy who has the success he has had. And also, by the way, one of those years when they lost to Michigan, they came within a field goal of beating Georgia, a team they were beating by, 2 touchdowns going into the fourth quarter. And if they make that field goal at the end of the game, they're beating TCU and they're winning a national title. So I think people there know he's a terrific coach. And I think they know there's a lot of good things, in place. As you mentioned, NIL, they really ramped up. I think they have some new leadership in key places there. The Oregon game will be huge, but I don't think win or lose, it's to me, the Michigan game again will be the one where it's like, that's the must win. It's not, and again, it's a long way between now and then, but I think that you're going to see this team is much better than it's been because they will be multidimensional and they will be physical in the run game again. They haven't been that way for a couple of years. They will be this year.
I want to talk about Sark and not the SEC, just Sark. I think the 12-team playoff is a huge benefit for Sark, and here's why. Because he's going to make this playoff with his recruiting every year he's at Texas, and he may never win a national title. When it's a 4-teamer and you can't get in with a Texas budget, that's a punitive offseason. But like college basketball coaches, you can go to your donors, your boosters, your AD and say, we've made the tournament 12 years in a row. I think more than any program, Texas tends to be almost delusional in its belief system, and they have good players, but I think it really benefits Sark because I think he'll win a natty. But I think Georgia's loaded, Kalen DeBoer's great, Oregon, Ohio State are equally as good, and maybe in easier conferences. Let's talk about that. Texas runs through coaches. They've got multiple billionaires in their donor group. I think the playoff, more than any coach, it's an advantage for Sark and the impatience of Longhorn boosters. What say you?
I would agree. I also think, Colin, what you have is they came off a great year last year. I know they didn't win the national title, but they came within a play of getting to the game. And I think considering where Texas has been, and honestly considering where he had been, when he got to Washington as a first-time head coach coming out of USC, the program was awful. They didn't win a game. He took them from awful to respectable, but then he kind of hit a ceiling, and then obviously went to USC, and it was a debacle, for issues from, off the field for him personally. Seems like he's grown a lot since then, and I know he's grown a lot as a coach because he took a lot of the things from that he learned under Nick Saban. He also took some of Nick Saban's best coaches and brought them to Austin. So I think he's got a really good staff. And, towards that part of the playoff, I think Sark is a guy whose reputation, like they will be able to recruit really well because there are going to be kids who are going to say, hey, this guy knows exactly what he's doing offensively. He's a great play caller. I think that's going to make it attractive for guys who sit there and think about NFL as much as NIL. And, you're right. I don't think they need to. Now, at some point, he's going to have to win a national title. And I honestly think after seeing what I saw last year, I think at some point he is going to win a national title. I don't know if it's going to be this year. I mean, I want to see Quinn Ewers take another step. He took a big step last year. But I think they're in position because what he's done really good is Texas used to have one of the most disappointing, offensive lines in college football. It's Texas. You should have good linemen. They didn't. They do now. And I think that's something they're keep building on. So I think they're going to be, I don't want to say the SEC is up for grabs because Kirby's still there. Obviously, Saban's not. But I think right now, for recruits who don't remember when Sark was at USC, much, certainly don't remember at Washington, I think they only know of, recent history. And to me, that's something they can really sell. And I think, like you said, the money people, I think at Texas, they're all on board. Plus, they have a really good AD who's really good at raising everything in the support piece of it in Chris Delconte. So I think these are good times right now for University of Texas football, and especially, for Sark.
Great stuff. Bruce Feldman, Big Ten Media Day. Good seeing you, buddy.
Good seeing you, Colin. We'll see you soon.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.